The return to memory lane. The evening sky over Toronto was painted in hues of deep orange and soft purple, the last remnants of daylight reflecting off the glass windows of the familiar old building. Keanu Reeves inhaled deeply, feeling the strange mixture of nostalgia and curiosity as he stepped onto the worn pavement outside his former high school. It had been decades since he'd last walked these halls. Life had taken him far. Hollywood, international fame, movie premieres, and a career that had defined him as one of the most beloved actors of his time. But tonight wasn't about any of that. He had returned for a simple reason: an invitation. The school was hosting a fundraiser for underprivileged students, an initiative that resonated deeply with him. Growing up, he had never forgotten the struggles of his childhood, the teachers who had encouraged him, or the friends who had supported him through difficult times. He didn't hesitate when he received the request to attend. And yet, as he stood there, gazing up at the school's towering brick facade, a different feeling settled over him. A pull from the past, something unspoken yet powerful. The air carried a familiar scent, the mix of freshly cut grass from the football field, and the faint hint of chalk dust that never seemed to leave the corridors. He stepped forward, his boots clicking softly against the pavement, the sound eerily similar to his younger days when he would rush into school, barely making it to class on time. The entrance doors swung open with ease, and suddenly, Keanu was no longer a Hollywood icon. He was just a student again, lost in memories. The halls were quieter now. The once bustling corridors, filled with the shouts and laughter of students, were now dimly lit and nearly empty. A few posters hung on the bulletin board, announcements for school plays, sports tryouts, and reminders about exam schedules. He smiled slightly, shaking his head. Some things never changed. As he walked past the rows of lockers, he let his fingers trail along the cold metal, the touch grounding him in a time long gone. He could almost hear the voices of his old friends, see their faces, and feel the energy of youth vibrating through these walls. Then something made him stop. Down the hall, past the classrooms, and near the entrance to the gym, he saw a figure moving slowly. A lone man, pushing a mop across the tiled floor, his motions slow but practiced. A rolling bucket of soapy water trailed behind him, the soft squeak of the wheels echoing through the silence. Keanu's breath hitched, something about the way the man moved, the slight bend in his back, the way he held the mop, the deliberate care in his motions. It was all too familiar. A long-buried memory surged forward, crashing into him with force. It couldn't be. His feet carried him closer, almost on their own, his heart beating faster with each step. The man was facing away from him, his back slightly hunched with age, but Keanu knew. His voice came out softer than he expected. "Mr. Fitzgerald." The old janitor paused mid-swipe, his grip tightening slightly on the mop handle. Slowly, he turned around, revealing a face worn with time, but still unmistakable. His gray hair was thinner now, his glasses slightly askew on his nose, and his uniform was faded with years of wear. But those eyes, the same kind, patient eyes Keanu remembered, looked at him in surprise. "Well, I'll be." The old man blinked, adjusting his glasses. "Keanu." A lump formed in Keanu's throat. "Mr. Fitzgerald." The janitor who had been here when Keanu was just a teenager. The man who had always greeted students with a warm smile, who had stayed late cleaning up after everyone else had gone home. The same janitor who had given him advice during his toughest days, who had once shared a sandwich with him when he had forgotten his lunch. And he was still here. Keanu took a step closer, his eyes scanning the elderly man's frail frame, the way his hands trembled slightly as he leaned on the mop. A wave of emotions flooded him: disbelief, concern, and a deep sadness. "Mr. Fitzgerald," Keanu said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you're still working here." The old janitor let out a small chuckle, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, someone's got to keep this place clean." Keanu frowned. He had expected him to be long retired, enjoying his golden years, maybe spending time with family. But instead, he was still here, mopping the same floors, working the same job he had been doing decades ago. "How old are you now?" Keanu asked hesitantly. Mr. Fitzgerald sighed, stretching his back slightly. 80. 80. Keanu's stomach twisted. Why was he still working? Why wasn't he home, resting, enjoying his life after so many years of service? Something wasn't right. Keanu looked around the hallway, then back at the old janitor. Are you okay? I mean, do you need help?" The elderly man waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't you worry about me, son. I've been doing this job a long time. It keeps me moving, keeps me sharp." But Keanu could see it, the exhaustion in his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands, the weight of years pressing down on him. This wasn't just a job. This was survival. And in that moment, Keanu Reeves made a silent decision. He wasn't going to walk away. He wasn't going to let this be just another memory. Something had to change, and he was going to be the one to make it happen. The weight of the years. The moment Keanu Reeves walked away from Mr. Fitzgerald that night, something inside him wouldn't let go. He had intended to stay at the fundraiser, to speak to the students, and to share a few words of encouragement, but his mind was elsewhere. The conversations around him became background noise. The laughter and music in the auditorium blurred into a distant hum. All he could think about was that old man still pushing a mop, just like he had when Keanu was a kid. 80 years old. It didn't sit right. Memories of a kind man. As Keanu drove back to his hotel that night, he let his thoughts drift back to the past. Mr. Fitzgerald had never just been the janitor. He had been a quiet guardian, someone who had seen thousands of students walk through those halls over the decades. And though most barely noticed him, Keanu had. As a teenager, he had often found himself lingering in the empty hallways after school, waiting for his ride or lost in thought about the chaos of his home life. And there, always moving through the shadows, was Mr. Fitzgerald, sweeping, cleaning, repairing lockers. One day, Keanu had forgotten his lunch. He had sat by himself near the lockers, stomach growling, trying to ignore it. Mr. Fitzgerald had passed by, stopped, and without a word, had handed him half of his own sandwich. "It's just peanut butter," the old man had said with a chuckle, "but it'll keep you going." Keanu never forgot that. And now, decades later, that same man was still working, still pushing through the exhaustion. But why? The more Keanu thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He needed answers. A visit to the past. The next morning, Keanu canceled his other plans and returned to the school. The halls were livelier now, filled with students hurrying between classes, laughing, shouting, living their lives. It was a stark contrast to the quiet of the previous evening. He found the principal's office and knocked. A middle-aged woman with short, graying hair looked up from her desk as he stepped inside. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Reeves," she said in surprise. "This is unexpected." Keanu gave a small, humble smile. "I was here for the fundraiser last night, but I wanted to ask you about someone." Mr. Fitzgerald, the janitor. At the mention of the name, her face changed. A mix of sadness and hesitation crossed her features. "Mr. Fitzgerald," she repeated, nodding. "He's been with the school for over 50 years. A good man. A kind man. Why is he still working?" Keanu asked bluntly. "He's 80 years old. Shouldn't he be retired by now?" The principal sighed, clasping her hands together. "Mr. Reeves, if I'm being honest, we've tried to help him. We've tried to convince him to retire, even raised money to support him. But he always refuses. He says he needs the job." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Needs it? Financially?" She nodded. "He never had children. His wife passed away years ago. And, well, the pension he receives isn't enough. He has bills to pay. Medical expenses. He doesn't complain, but we know." A wave of frustration swept through Keanu. The man who had spent his entire life taking care of others, keeping the school clean, making sure kids had a safe space, was struggling. "Where does he live?" Keanu asked, his voice steady. The principal hesitated. "He rents a small place a few blocks from here." "It's not much." That was all Keanu needed to hear, a hard reality. That afternoon, he found himself standing in front of an aging apartment complex. The bricks were faded, the windows streaked with dust. It wasn't right. Mr. Fitzgerald should have been somewhere comfortable, somewhere warm, not living in a place that looked like it had seen better days decades ago. Keanu knocked on the door. A shuffling noise came from inside before the door slowly creaked open. "Keanu." Mr. Fitzgerald blinked, surprised. He still wore his work uniform, the fabric faded and worn from years of washing. Keanu gave him a small smile. "Can I come in?" The old man stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Inside, the apartment was neat but sparse. The furniture was old, the walls bare except for a few framed pictures. A single lamp cast a dim glow over the small living space. Keanu's eyes drifted to the counter, where a stack of unpaid bills lay in plain sight. Electricity, rent, medical costs. He clenched his fists. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Keanu asked, turning back to the elderly man. Mr. Fitzgerald sighed and sat down in an old armchair, the cushions sinking beneath him. "Wasn't anyone's burden to carry." "You've spent your whole life helping other people," Keanu said, shaking his head. "Why didn't you let anyone help you?" The old janitor gave him a small, tired smile. "Keanu, some people aren't meant to be saved. Some of us just keep moving until we can't anymore." Keanu stared at him for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "That's not how this story ends." A plan in motion. Over the next few days, Keanu began making quiet arrangements. First, he reached out to his contacts, lawyers, financial advisors, charity organizers. Then he began making calls, setting up the pieces of a plan that would change Mr. Fitzgerald's life. He didn't tell the old janitor what he was doing. He simply watched as the man struggled to lift heavy buckets of water, as his hands trembled while wiping down tables, as his steps grew slower with each passing day. And then, one evening, Keanu returned to the school. This time, he wasn't just there to visit. He was there to change a life. As Mr. Fitzgerald finished his shift, Keanu was waiting outside the school doors. "Come with me," Keanu said. The old man hesitated. "Where to?" Keanu simply smiled. "Someplace better." And with that, he led the janitor away, not knowing that what was about to happen next would stun the entire world. The unexpected gift. Keanu walked side by side with Mr. Fitzgerald, the elderly man's steps slow but purposeful. The evening air was crisp, a light breeze rustling the fallen leaves along the sidewalk as they made their way down the street. Mr. Fitzgerald, for once, wasn't holding a mop or pushing a cart. His hands were tucked in his pockets, his back slightly straighter than usual. There was a quiet, almost bewildered expression on his face, as if he couldn't quite figure out what was happening. Keanu didn't say much at first, allowing the silence between them to settle. It felt natural, comforting, like the kind of silence they'd shared in the halls of the school all those years ago. Yet there was a heaviness in the air, a sense that something monumental was unfolding. The streetlights flickered on as they approached an upscale building in the heart of Toronto. The towering glass structure gleamed in the dusk, a sharp contrast to the rundown apartment complex where Mr. Fitzgerald had spent his days. Keanu glanced at the old man, whose brow furrowed in confusion. "Where are we?" Mr. Fitzgerald asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Keanu smiled, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're here to make a change. Just trust me." They stepped through the revolving doors, and Keanu led him to the elevator. The polished floors reflected their footsteps as they ascended to the top floor. Mr. Fitzgerald, still unsure of what was happening, looked around with wide eyes. "What's going on, Keanu?" Keanu simply gave him a reassuring smile, not offering any more answers. He had a plan, and for the first time in a long while, he could see the path ahead clearly. A new beginning. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a spacious, luxurious apartment. The floors were hardwood, the walls adorned with paintings and sculptures. A floor-to-ceiling window provided a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the lights of Toronto sparkling like a field of stars below. Mr. Fitzgerald stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw slightly dropping as he took in the surroundings. What is this place? Keanu gestured to the living room, where a plush sofa sat beside a cozy fireplace. This is your new home, Keanu said softly. Mr. Fitzgerald blinked several times, as though trying to process the words. What do you mean, my new home? Keanu walked over to a table by the window, where an envelope lay. He picked it up and handed it to the elderly man. You've been working your whole life, Mr. Fitzgerald. You've given everything to others. It's time you start living for yourself. The old janitor opened the envelope, his trembling hands carefully pulling out the letter inside. His eyes scanned the words quickly, his confusion turning to something else, something more like disbelief. The letter explained everything. It was a gift from Keanu, a fully paid apartment, a financial trust, and a plan to take care of Mr. Fitzgerald for the rest of his life. I don't understand, Mr. Fitzgerald stammered, looking up from the letter, his eyes wet with emotion. I can't accept this. You've already done so much for me. Keanu walked toward him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You've done enough for everyone else. It's time for you to have some peace. You've earned it. The elderly man's hands gripped the letter tightly, and for the first time in a long while, a true smile spread across his face. His eyes, usually clouded with weariness, now shone with something brighter, hope. But Keanu, Mr. Fitzgerald's voice wavered. Why? Why are you doing this for me? Keanu's gaze softened. Because you matter. You've always mattered. And I'm not the only one who sees that. It's time the world sees it too. A life transformed. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Fitzgerald settled into his new life. At first, it felt like a dream he couldn't fully grasp. Luxury, comfort, the kind of peace he had never thought possible. Keanu made sure he had everything he needed, from groceries to doctor's appointments, ensuring that the old janitor's every concern was taken care of. At first, Mr. Fitzgerald was hesitant. He refused to spend money on himself, insisting that he didn't need anything extravagant. Keanu patiently showed him the joy of living freely, encouraging him to take walks in the park, visit new places, and even learn to enjoy the small things, like a hot cup of tea on a chilly morning or a phone call with an old friend. But the most unexpected transformation came from within Mr. Fitzgerald himself. As the days passed, he began to open up in ways Keanu hadn't anticipated. The man who had always kept his thoughts and feelings close to his chest now began to share stories from his past, memories of his late wife, tales of his childhood, and the incredible people he had met over the years. One afternoon, sitting in the sun on the balcony of his new apartment, Mr. Fitzgerald turned to Keanu. You know, I never thought I'd see a day like this, he said softly. Never thought I'd get to just live. It feels good. Keanu nodded, his heart swelling with pride. You deserve it, Mr. Fitzgerald. The elderly man smiled and looked out at the city skyline, his gaze softening. I always thought that if I could just keep moving, if I could keep working, keep helping people, I'd find a purpose. I never realized that the purpose was to find peace. Keanu didn't say anything in response. Instead, he simply stood beside the old janitor, letting the quiet moment wash over them both. The impact of one kindness. As news of Mr. Fitzgerald's transformation spread, the story began to make waves in the community. Local news outlets picked up the story of how Keanu Reeves had helped his former high school janitor. And soon, it was all over social media. People were amazed by the act of kindness, and it inspired many to look at their own lives and the ways in which they could make a difference. Keanu didn't care about the attention. It was never about that for him. He had done this because it was the right thing to do. Because the world needed more moments of kindness, more people who took the time to help others. As for Mr. Fitzgerald, he had found something he never thought possible at his age. Joy. A new chapter had begun for him, filled with possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, he was free. It was a simple truth, but one that carried immense weight. Everyone deserved a chance to live with dignity, no matter how old they were or how long they had spent giving to others. And through Keanu's act of kindness, Mr. Fitzgerald had found the peace he had spent his entire life searching for. The ripple effect. Life in the apartment was taking on a new rhythm for Mr. Fitzgerald. The days of mopping floors and scrubbing away at the past were gone. In their place, mornings were spent sipping coffee by the window, afternoons spent reading books he hadn't had time to open in years, and evenings spent exploring the world he had never given himself the chance to see. But the most profound change had occurred deep within him. For so long, Mr. Fitzgerald had felt like a forgotten cog in the machine of life. He had lived his days as an invisible figure, cleaning up after others, silently doing his work with no expectation of recognition or thanks. But Keanu's unexpected kindness had forced him to confront something he had buried for decades, a deep yearning for connection, for purpose, and for the simple joy of being seen. And now, the world had opened up to him in ways he never thought possible. A friend reborn. One crisp autumn morning, Keanu paid Mr. Fitzgerald another visit. It had been a few weeks since he brought the elderly janitor to the apartment, and he could already see how much the man had changed. The exhaustion that once weighed on his face had lightened, and there was a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Keanu knocked on the door and waited, the sound of footsteps growing louder from inside. When the door swung open, Mr. Fitzgerald greeted him with a wide smile. "Keanu," the old man said, his voice warm. "Come in, come in." Keanu stepped inside, his gaze immediately falling on the neatly arranged living room. It was clear that Mr. Fitzgerald was making himself at home. "I'm glad to see you're settling in," Keanu remarked with a smile. "Settling in?" Mr. Fitzgerald chuckled. "I'm living, Keanu. I'm living." They both laughed, and Keanu sat down in the armchair by the window. "You've been busy," Keanu observed, noting the collection of books stacked on the coffee table, the new set of gardening tools by the door, and the framed photograph of Mr. Fitzgerald's late wife on the mantel. The old man nodded. "I've always wanted to learn about gardening. Never had the time before." He paused, his voice turning more serious. "I've also been thinking about something, Keanu. Something I need to ask you." Keanu leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "I want to give back," Mr. Fitzgerald said, his voice filled with determination. "You've done so much for me, but I can't just sit here and take. I need to do something. I need to help others, just like I always have. I've got so many years of wisdom, and I want to share it." Keanu smiled, feeling his chest tighten with emotion. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when Mr. Fitzgerald's purpose, his quiet sense of service, would find a new direction. "You don't need to repay me, Mr. Fitzgerald," Keanu said gently. "But if you want to give back, then I'm all for it. What did you have in mind?" The old man grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I've always wanted to volunteer at a food shelter. Help those who don't have enough to eat. Maybe I can use my gardening skills to grow some fresh vegetables for the kitchen." Keanu nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "That sounds like a great idea." "Good," Mr. Fitzgerald said. "Then let's do it." A new mission. Within days, Keanu made some calls, and Mr. Fitzgerald was connected with a local food bank. He began spending his mornings helping to prepare meals, working with volunteers, and sharing his stories with anyone who would listen. His years of quiet service had given him a profound understanding of the struggles others faced, and he found that he could offer comfort simply by lending an ear. One afternoon, as he worked alongside a young woman in her 20s, Mr. Fitzgerald shared a piece of wisdom that had stuck with him all his life. Sometimes, he said, you think you're alone. You think no one notices what you're doing. But believe me, someone is always watching. And someone always cares. The woman, who had been struggling with her own hardships, looked up at him, her eyes wide. I needed to hear that today, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Mr. Fitzgerald smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone, dear. Never forget that. And with those words, Mr. Fitzgerald's transformation was complete. He wasn't just living for himself anymore. He was living for others, just as he had always wanted. The impact of one life. As Mr. Fitzgerald continued his volunteer work, the ripple effect of Keanu's act of kindness spread throughout the community. People began to take notice of the elderly man who had once been the invisible janitor, who now spent his days helping others. His quiet wisdom and compassion became a beacon for others, reminding them that no matter how small or insignificant they might feel, they too could make a difference. Keanu, for his part, was content to watch from the sidelines. He didn't need the recognition, and he didn't want to be in the spotlight. He was simply happy to see his friend thriving, doing what he was meant to do all along. But the story didn't stop there. In the months that followed, news outlets picked up on Mr. Fitzgerald's transformation. They reported on the elderly man who had been given a second chance at life, and the story touched the hearts of millions. People reached out to offer help, to send donations, and to volunteer at the shelter where Mr. Fitzgerald worked. What started as one act of kindness from Keanu Reeves had grown into a movement of generosity, compassion, and service. Keanu, quietly watching from the sidelines, was humbled by the impact of his small gesture. He had helped one man, but in doing so, he had sparked a fire of goodwill that was spreading far and wide. A gift that keeps on giving. On a warm summer evening, Keanu and Mr. Fitzgerald sat together on the balcony of the elderly man's apartment, watching the sunset over the city. You know, Keanu, Mr. Fitzgerald said, his voice filled with contentment. I never thought I'd be here. Never thought I'd get the chance to live this kind of life. Keanu turned to him, his gaze soft. You earned it, Mr. Fitzgerald. You earned it 1,000 times over. The old man nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I don't think I ever really understood the power of kindness until now. Not the kind of kindness that comes with a price, but the kind that comes with no expectation in return. That's the kind of kindness that changes everything. Keanu smiled, knowing that the journey wasn't just about the destination. It was about the people we help along the way, the lives we touch, and the quiet moments that make all the difference. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Keanu knew one thing for sure. The ripple effect of kindness would continue long after the day was done. The awakening of a legacy. The days had slipped by quietly, each one bringing more joy, more purpose to Mr. Fitzgerald's life. What started as a chance to give back had turned into something deeper, something more transformative than he could have imagined. His time at the food bank had become not just a new routine but a calling. He was a mentor, a guide, and a living testament to the power of never giving up. Keanu had become a quiet observer of this new chapter, content with seeing his old friend flourishing. He'd made a difference in Mr. Fitzgerald's life, yes, but what Keanu had unknowingly sparked was far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. The ripple effect of kindness wasn't confined to Mr. Fitzgerald. It had begun to spread outwards, touching others in ways that were impossible to measure. A life reclaimed. On one particularly cold winter's day, Keanu arrived at the food bank to find Mr. Fitzgerald in the middle of a conversation with a young man named Josh. The young man was holding a small child in his arms, the boy clutching his teddy bear tightly to his chest. Mr. Fitzgerald had been sharing one of his life stories with the young family, his voice steady and comforting. Keanu stood at the door for a moment, unnoticed, taking in the scene. Mr. Fitzgerald was no longer the tired, forgotten janitor who had walked the school halls. No, He had become something else. A storyteller, a mentor, a man who had transformed into a beacon of hope for anyone who came across his path. Josh noticed Keanu standing in the doorway, and a smile spread across his face. "Keanu, good to see you." Keanu waved and made his way inside, offering a nod of greeting to the young family. Mr. Fitzgerald turned, a knowing look in his eyes. "Ah, Keanu, just the man I was telling them about. This is Josh and his little one, Lucas." Keanu extended a hand to Josh, shaking it warmly. "Nice to meet you both." "Keanu," Josh said, his voice full of gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you. For Mr. Fitzgerald, he's been like a second father to me. He helped me find a job, gave me the confidence to turn my life around. I don't know what I would have done without him." Keanu's heart swelled with emotion. The old man had always been a quiet source of wisdom, but now he was a mentor, guiding those who needed it the most. It was a gift Mr. Fitzgerald had never asked for, yet it was one he'd given freely. "I'm glad to hear that," Keanu said softly, turning to Mr. Fitzgerald. "You're changing lives, my friend." Mr. Fitzgerald smiled, though his eyes were full of humble pride. "No, Keanu, we're changing lives. It's all of us working together. You started something, and now it's up to the rest of us to keep it going. Building a legacy." The weeks that followed only deepened the bond between Keanu, Mr. Fitzgerald, and the community. It wasn't long before more people reached out to the food bank, inspired by Mr. Fitzgerald's story. They brought donations, volunteered their time, and most importantly, listened. People were beginning to understand what Mr. Fitzgerald had known all along. Kindness didn't just change the person receiving it, it changed everyone involved. Keanu watched as the food bank flourished, with Mr. Fitzgerald becoming an integral part of its operation. His knowledge of gardening had been put to good use, and he worked alongside volunteers to plant a small vegetable garden behind the building. The garden would eventually provide fresh produce to families in need, an enduring symbol of the legacy Mr. Fitzgerald was building. But it wasn't just about the vegetables or the food. It was about the people who came together to support each other, to lift each other up. Keanu began to see firsthand how the small acts of kindness were forming a community. They weren't just providing food. They were providing something even more valuable: hope. The unseen heroes. One afternoon, as Keanu sat with Mr. Fitzgerald in the newly constructed garden area behind the food bank, he noticed how peaceful everything seemed. The soft hum of the city could be heard in the distance, but here it felt like time slowed down. The garden had become a sanctuary for those who worked there, a place where they could escape from the worries of their everyday lives and focus on what truly mattered. Mr. Fitzgerald leaned back against the garden fence, his hands clasped behind his back. "You know, Keanu, I've had a lot of time to think about everything. About the people I've helped and the people who've helped me." Keanu nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I used to think that being a janitor was just a job," Mr. Fitzgerald said slowly. "But now I see it differently. I was always cleaning up after others, making sure things were in order. But what I didn't realize was that I was helping people in ways I couldn't see. Every mop I pushed, every floor I swept, it was all a small part of something bigger." Keanu smiled, his heart full. "You've always had a purpose, Mr. Fitzgerald. You just had to find it." The old man nodded. "Yeah, and now I see that it wasn't just about the work. It was about the connections I made, about how we all have a part to play in this world. Some of us clean the floors, some of us provide food, but we all make a difference." Keanu sat back, taking in his friend's words. "That's exactly right. And now you've created something that's bigger than any of us, a legacy that will live on, an invitation to change." As the months passed, Keanu found himself becoming more involved in the work Mr. Fitzgerald had started. He worked alongside him at the food bank, volunteering his time when he could. And as he did, he saw the transformation in the people around him. One day, as Keanu was unloading a box of donations from his car, A familiar face walked up to him. It was Josh, the young man Mr. Fitzgerald had helped turn his life around. This time, Josh wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a woman and 2 children. "Keanu," Josh called out, waving him over. "I wanted you to meet my family. This is Marissa, my wife, and these are our kids, Lucas and Emma." Keanu smiled and shook their hands, impressed by the change in Josh's demeanor. "You're doing great, Josh," Keanu said. "Thank you," Josh replied. "I couldn't have done it without Mr. Fitzgerald. He showed me that there's always a way out of the darkness. Now I'm working at a local bakery, and I'm planning on starting my own business one day." Keanu looked over at Mr. Fitzgerald, who had just entered the garden with a few volunteers. The old man's face broke into a smile as he saw Josh, his family, and Keanu standing together. "That's the real gift," Mr. Fitzgerald said quietly, as if reading Keanu's mind. "When someone takes what you've given them and makes something new out of it, that's how you know you've changed the world." Keanu watched as the young family interacted with the volunteers, helping out in ways they hadn't before. It was clear that the community Mr. Fitzgerald had built was beginning to extend far beyond just the people involved with the food bank. It was becoming a movement of kindness, of second chances, of new beginnings. And Keanu knew that it had all started with one act of generosity. The heart of the change. As winter began to melt into spring, the changes in Mr. Fitzgerald's life seemed almost miraculous. The garden behind the food bank had blossomed, its rows of vegetables growing with care and attention. The once small initiative to offer fresh produce had evolved into a major part of the community's outreach. Local businesses donated supplies, volunteers flocked to help, and families in need received not only food, but a sense of dignity and connection. Mr. Fitzgerald had become a symbol of resilience, a quiet hero whose impact reached far beyond his humble beginnings. People sought him out for advice, for guidance, and for inspiration. He had become the living embodiment of kindness, both the giver and the recipient. And every day, he found new ways to contribute, always searching for another way to serve his community, just as Keanu had encouraged him to do. For Keanu, the transformation in his old friend had become a source of deep satisfaction, but also a reminder of the power of human connection. He saw how one small act, helping Mr. Fitzgerald, had ignited a fire of generosity that spread like wildfire. It was as if Keanu had planted a seed, and now it was growing into something beautiful, something larger than either of them had anticipated. But Keanu knew this was just the beginning. A new project emerges. One afternoon, Keanu received a call from Mr. Fitzgerald. "Keanu, I need your help with something," Mr. Fitzgerald said, his voice brimming with excitement. Keanu leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking," Mr. Fitzgerald began, "about all the people who come through the food bank. Some of them just need a little help, a little push to get back on their feet. But a lot of them need more than that. They need skills. They need something to do, something that makes them feel like they have a purpose." Keanu nodded, already sensing where this was going. "So, what do you have in mind?" "I want to start a program," Mr. Fitzgerald said, a note of conviction in his voice. "A mentorship program. We can teach people how to garden, how to cook, how to manage finances, even how to start a business. Whatever skills they need to get ahead. And then we'll pair them up with mentors, people who've been through tough times themselves and made it out. We'll show them that they can succeed, that they're not alone." Keanu felt his heart race. "That's an incredible idea, Mr. Fitzgerald. How can I help?" The elderly man chuckled. "Well, Keanu, I was hoping you'd be the first mentor." Keanu laughed, slightly taken aback. "You want me to help?" Mr. Fitzgerald's voice was firm. "Of course. You've already done so much, but this is how we make lasting change. It's not just about giving people food. It's about giving them the tools to rebuild their lives. And you've got a lot to teach." Keanu was quiet for a moment. He'd always felt a pull to help others, but this felt different. It wasn't just about writing a check or offering a fleeting word of encouragement. This was about being involved in people's lives, walking with them through the hardships and triumphs. And it was exactly what he needed. Mentorship begins. A few weeks later, the mentorship program kicked off. Keanu, alongside Mr. Fitzgerald and a few other community leaders, began meeting with individuals who had been struggling to make ends meet. These were people from all walks of life, young adults looking for work, single parents trying to raise children, elderly individuals who had been living alone for years. Keanu was paired with a young woman named Sarah. She was in her mid-20s with 2 small children and had been struggling to find steady employment. Her story resonated with Keanu. Her determination to build a better life for her children reminded him of his own early struggles. Over the next few months, Keanu and Sarah met regularly. They worked on resume building, interview skills, and most importantly, self-confidence. Sarah was hesitant at first, unsure of what she had to offer, but Keanu patiently guided her through each step. He taught her the power of perseverance and the importance of believing in herself. One afternoon, as they sat in a coffee shop going over her resume, Sarah looked at Keanu, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Keanu," she said, "I never thought I could do this. I never thought I could have a career, you know. I thought I was stuck." Keanu smiled warmly, his voice gentle. "You're not stuck, Sarah. You've got everything it takes. It's just about taking the first step, no matter how small." Sarah smiled back, a spark of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Keanu. I don't think I could have done it without you." Keanu shook his head. "You did it. I just helped you see it." The first fruits of their labor. It wasn't long before Sarah found a job at a local daycare, something she had always dreamed of doing. It wasn't a huge leap, but it was the first step in the right direction. And for Sarah, it was everything. She thanked Keanu and Mr. Fitzgerald countless times, but Keanu knew it was just the beginning of her journey. As the months passed, more success stories emerged from the program. Others like Sarah began to find their way, learning new skills and rebuilding their lives. Some found work, others started small businesses, and many simply gained the confidence they had lacked for years. The mentorship program became a beacon of hope in a community that had often felt forgotten. Through it all, Keanu remained quietly involved, always there when needed, but never seeking attention or praise. He had learned the true meaning of giving, not in grand gestures, but in consistent, everyday actions. He had helped to plant the seeds, but it was the people he mentored who were growing and thriving. And in watching them succeed, Keanu felt a deep sense of fulfillment, far greater than anything fame or fortune had ever given him. A ripple across the city. The mentorship program spread beyond the food bank. Word of it traveled quickly through the community, and soon other organizations began adopting similar programs, inspired by the success of Mr. Fitzgerald's vision. Keanu was invited to speak at several community events, but he always turned the focus back to the people who had been part of the program, sharing their stories of resilience and triumph. It wasn't just the food bank or the garden that was making a difference now. It was a movement built on empathy, kindness, and the belief that everyone, no matter their past, had the power to rebuild their future. The city of Toronto was beginning to change. More people were finding their way out of poverty. More people were standing up and helping one another. And it all traced back to one simple, selfless act. A janitor's quiet perseverance, the generosity of a man who saw a need and decided to do something about it. Keanu looked out over the city one evening, from the balcony of the apartment where Mr. Fitzgerald now lived. The skyline was a canvas of lights, and the streets below bustled with life. Keanu realized that, in a way, the city itself was different now. And it was all because one man, who had spent a lifetime cleaning up after others, had finally found a place where he could be seen. A legacy that lives on. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of summer as it whispered through the streets of Toronto. It was an evening like no other, one that carried a sense of finality, of resolution. After all that had transpired, The journey of Keanu Reeves and Mr. Fitzgerald had reached its zenith. What had started with an act of kindness, a quiet gesture of helping an elderly man struggling to make ends meet, had now blossomed into a legacy that would endure for years to come. Keanu stood outside the food bank one late afternoon, watching as families streamed in to collect their meals. The line was longer than ever, and yet there was a sense of unity, of hope. The community was thriving, nourished not just by food, but by the spirit of giving that had permeated everything. Volunteers worked side by side with the people they were helping, and the stories of transformation were everywhere. It was a living testament to how compassion could change the world, one small act at a time. In the distance, Mr. Fitzgerald could be seen, his back slightly bent with age, but his hands steady as he worked in the garden, planting seeds for the next harvest. He had been right all along. This wasn't just about giving food. It was about planting the seeds of a better future. Keanu couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment as he watched the elderly man. It had been a long, beautiful journey for both of them. And now, they stood at the precipice of something larger than either could have imagined. The culmination of a dream. It had been nearly a year since the mentorship program had been launched, and the results spoke for themselves. What began as a small initiative, started with little more than a vision, had grown into an unstoppable force for change. Hundreds of individuals had been mentored, each one finding their own path toward a better life. Some had started businesses, others had gained employment, and many had found the strength to leave behind toxic environments. The food bank itself had transformed. What was once a modest operation now included job training, financial literacy courses, and even mental health support. The garden that Mr. Fitzgerald had planted was not only a source of fresh produce, but a sanctuary for those who had been through the darkest times of their lives. It was a place where people could find peace, reflect, and heal. The work wasn't just about the vegetables. It was about planting hope. As Keanu stood there, lost in thought, he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Mr. Fitzgerald beside him, his tired eyes shining with something deeper, satisfaction, pride, and something else, peace. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Mr. Fitzgerald asked quietly. Keanu smiled, his voice full of affection. "Yeah, I am. It's hard to believe how far we've come." The old man nodded, wiping his hands on his apron before resting them on his hips. "It's incredible. But you know, Keanu, none of this would have happened without you. You gave me the push I needed. I was stuck for a long time, not seeing any way out. But now, I see it. I see how much we can do for each other." Keanu shook his head, his voice gentle. "You're the one who did it, Mr. Fitzgerald. You're the one who put in the work. All I did was show you that there was another way. You've changed lives, not just yours, but hundreds of others." The old janitor's face softened, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "I think we've both been changing lives, Keanu. I just needed a little help to see it." Keanu turned his gaze back to the bustling food bank, the volunteers, the families, and the transformation that was happening before his eyes. This wasn't just a story of two people, it was a story of a community coming together, of people supporting one another. It was a reminder of what humanity could do when it remembered to show compassion, to offer a hand, and to never give up. The next step. As Keanu continued to work alongside Mr. Fitzgerald, their bond only deepened, but it became clear that their time in the spotlight was nearing its end. The community had taken the mentorship program and made it their own. The food bank had become more than just a place to get food. It had become a center for transformation, and the people involved were the true heroes. One afternoon, Mr. Fitzgerald called Keanu into his office at the food bank. It was a modest room, filled with papers, books, and a small desk where Mr. Fitzgerald had done most of his work. The old man looked up from a pile of forms and motioned for Keanu to sit. "I think it's time," Mr. Fitzgerald said, his voice steady. "Time for me to step back." Keanu raised an eyebrow, unsure if he understood. "Step back? What do you mean? The elderly man leaned forward, his hands folded together. I've done my part. You've done yours. This place, it's not about me anymore. It's about the people. About all the volunteers, the mentors, the families who've come through here. They've learned the lessons I had to learn. They've created something stronger than anything I could have built alone. Keanu understood immediately. You're passing the torch, aren't you? Mr. Fitzgerald smiled softly, a weight lifting from his shoulders. I've never been one for the spotlight, Keanu. It's time for others to lead. You've already shown me that it's not about being noticed. It's about making a difference. And that's what we've done. Keanu's heart swelled with pride for his friend. Mr. Fitzgerald was right. The food bank, the garden, the mentorship program, it was no longer about them. It was about everyone who had been touched by their work, everyone who had taken part in the journey. The community was now running on its own steam, ready to push forward without looking back. I'm proud of you, Keanu said quietly, his voice full of emotion. Mr. Fitzgerald nodded. I'm proud of us. Together, we've built something that will last. The end of one journey, the start of another. As time passed, the mentorship program continued to thrive. The food bank expanded, and its work began to reach more people than ever before. Mr. Fitzgerald's legacy had been solidified, not just in the walls of the food bank, but in the hearts of the people whose lives had been changed. Keanu, too, had found a new purpose. He continued to support the program in whatever way he could, but he had learned that the greatest impact often came from working behind the scenes, letting others shine. For Mr. Fitzgerald, it was time to retire, to enjoy the fruits of his labor and spend his remaining years surrounded by the love and respect he had earned. He had earned it, and as Keanu watched him, he knew that the world would never be the same because of the quiet janitor who had kept his head down, worked hard, and never asked for anything in return. But now Mr. Fitzgerald had everything he needed, a legacy that would live on for generations. His story was not just one of survival, but of hope, generosity, and the incredible impact one person could have. As for Keanu, he knew that while his name might never be as famous as it had once been, he had been part of something far greater than the fame he had once sought. He had helped change lives, not by starring in movies or wearing a suit, but by being present, by listening, and by showing up when it mattered most. Together, Keanu and Mr. Fitzgerald had created something far more powerful than anything either could have achieved on their own. And in the end, that was the true measure of their success.